A judge insults Pam Bondi in open court. Minutes later, he's in handcuffs. You won't believe what happened next. Pam Bondi was no stranger to high-pressure situations. She had spent years battling some of the most complex and high-profile legal cases in the country, standing firm against corruption and deception. But as she stepped into the grand, wood-paneled courtroom of Judge Howard Gates, a man known for his razor-sharp tongue and erratic rulings, a strange tension filled the air. Something about today felt different, off. This wasn't just another routine hearing. No, this case carried the weight of scandal, power, and political consequences. At the center of it all was a wealthy and well-connected developer, someone with deep political alliances, now facing severe allegations. The accusations? Diverting state funds, money meant for public projects, into his own private developments. The evidence against him was undeniable, meticulously compiled, and damning. Bondi had spent weeks preparing, making sure every argument, every document, and every legal precedent was airtight. But what she wasn't prepared for, the palpable hostility radiating from the bench before she even uttered a single word. Judge Gates barely acknowledged her as she approached the plaintiff's table, his expression unreadable. Instead of welcoming her statement, he flipped through a case file at an agonizingly slow pace, drawing out the silence in the room. But this wasn't just an ordinary procedural pause. No, this was deliberate. This was a power move, an unspoken message meant to put her on edge. And then, finally, without even bothering to glance up, he spoke. "Miss Bondi," he drawled, voice dripping with condescension. "I assume you've brought something worth my time today? Or should we just fast forward to the part where you waste it?" A few chuckles rippled through the back of the courtroom, mostly from the defense team, who seemed all too comfortable in this judge's presence. But Pam? She remained unshaken. She had faced worse. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, unwavering, "the evidence in this case speaks for itself. This is about the misuse of taxpayer dollars, and my role here is to ensure that the facts are brought to light, accurately and transparently." Judge Gates leaned back in his chair, feigning boredom as he smirked. "Taxpayer dollars, right?" he scoffed. "Because that's never been the basis of a baseless case before, Bondi felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her composure. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I would hardly call felony corruption charges baseless." For a brief moment, their eyes met, a silent but intense clash. His stare was cold, almost calculating. Hers, steady, unyielding. But before she could say another word, he cut her off. "Again, Mrs. Bondi, spare me the lectures. Just get to the point. I don't have all day for whatever grandstanding you've planned." A murmur spread through the room. The people in the gallery, though relatively few in number, were on high alert. This wasn't just a tough judge keeping order. Something about this felt personal. Pam took a slow, deliberate breath, recalibrating. She knew exactly what was happening. Gates wanted to throw her off, keep her unbalanced, control the pace of the hearing. But she wasn't about to play his game. She picked up a folder, flipping it open with precision. "Your Honor, I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit A. These financial records clearly demonstrate." But before she could finish, Gates cut in again, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Do you always insist on drowning people in paperwork, Miss Bondi, or is this just your way of compensating?" That one landed. The shift in the room was instant. The defense attorney smirked. A few reporters exchanged subtle glances. The tension in the air thickened. But Bondi? She didn't flinch. She had dealt with men like Gates before. Men who thrived on intimidation, who wielded power like a weapon, who pushed and prodded until their opponents cracked. And she had learned one thing. The only way to win was to never, ever let them see you rattled. So she paused. Just long enough to make a statement, without saying a word. Then, calmly, she set the folder down and clasped her hands together. "Your Honor, if you'd prefer to continue making this personal, I'd be more than happy to request a recess so we can address any professional concerns you may have." It was subtle, not aggressive, not overtly defiant, but pointed. A quiet warning. She wasn't about to be pushed around. A flicker of something crossed the judge's face. Amusement? Annoyance? It was hard to tell. But he wasn't finished. "Oh, I don't have any concerns, Miss Bondi. I just know a weak case when I see one." This time, the murmurs in the gallery weren't just whispers. There were gasps. Someone muttered under their breath. This wasn't normal. This wasn't how a judge was supposed to conduct a hearing. Pam could feel the shift in the room, the realization dawning on those watching. This was something else. She adjusted her blazer, straightened a few papers, and met his gaze, unwavering. "Then I suppose we should let the evidence do the talking, Your Honor." But as she said the words, she caught something in his expression. Not just arrogance. Not just condescension. No, there was something deeper. A flicker of something almost anxious. Like a man who had a stake in the outcome of this case. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't just courtroom theatrics. Something bigger was at play. And she was about to find out exactly what it was. Judge Gates wasn't just being combative. He had something to hide. But what he didn't know.
So did she.
Pam Bondi had been in plenty of tense hearings before. She had faced opposition, resistance, and even outright hostility in the courtroom. But this was different. Judge Gates wasn't just ruling from the bench, he was playing a game. A calculated, deliberate attempt to undercut her, to rattle her, to make her second-guess every word she spoke.
But why?
She could feel the weight of his stare as she moved through her arguments, a constant, pressing force. Every time she spoke, she could sense him waiting, watching, ready to pounce. She could practically see it, the slight curl of his lips, the slow, deliberate tapping of his fingers against the bench, as if daring her to keep going. Well, she wasn't about to stop. "Your Honor," she said, keeping her voice even, controlled. "These documents show a clear discrepancy in the funding allocations. The defendant's company received nearly triple the amount that was originally approved in the budget, and yet, none of it appears in the state records." She turned slightly, gesturing toward the projection screen, where the financial statements were displayed for all to see. "Now, if you look here, Miss Bondi," Gates cut in abruptly, that smug edge never leaving his voice. "I hate to interrupt your presentation. Really, I do, but I think we've seen enough numbers for one day." Bondi glanced at him, then back at the screen. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. "Your Honor, with all due respect, these numbers are the foundation of this case. They prove—"
He scoffed.
"And yet, I fail to see anything that justifies wasting the court's time like this." There it was again. Wasting time. That wasn't just impatience. That was strategy. He was trying to smother this case before it even got off the ground. Behind her, she heard a soft rustling, her prosecution team shifting in their seats, exchanging quiet, uneasy glances. They felt it too. Something wasn't right. Bondi tightened her grip on her pen, flipping to the next page in her file. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit a motion to—" "Denied." Silence. Bondi looked up, her brows slightly furrowed. "I haven't even stated the motion yet." Gates leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench, his voice casual, almost amused. "And yet, I can already tell you, it's going nowhere. Let's be honest, Miss Bondi. This entire case is built on speculation. A little creative accounting, and suddenly you're crying corruption?" In the corner of her eye, she saw the defense attorney smirk. He hadn't needed to say a word. Gates was doing all the work for him. Bondi exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "Your Honor, are you refusing to allow my motion before even hearing its contents?" A pause. A beat too long. Then, finally, "I'm refusing to indulge this circus act any longer." The courtroom wasn't just tense now, it was shifting. Eyes darted, heads turned. Even the reporters in the back of the room were scribbling faster, their pens racing across their notepads. Bondi caught the glance of a juror, a woman in her 50s, wearing a dark blazer. The woman's brows were furrowed, lips pressed together. She wasn't the only one taking notice. The problem with arrogance? It makes people pay attention. Bondi squared her shoulders. "Very well, Your Honor. Then let's proceed with the next piece of evidence." She turned back to the screen, clicking to the next slide. This document, obtained through a subpoena, shows that. Miss Bondi. The tone was different this time. A shift.
She stopped.
Looked at him. Judge Gates was no longer leaning back in his chair. The smug expression was gone. His hands were clasped now, his mouth drawn into a thin, hard line. Something had changed. Approached the bench. It wasn't a request. The courtroom hushed. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, setting her papers down, she walked toward him. As she reached the bench, he lowered his voice just enough so only she could hear. I'd strongly suggest you reconsider the direction you're taking here, Miss Bondi. She tilted her head slightly. Excuse me? His expression didn't change. I'm saying, he murmured, his voice quieter now, that some fights aren't worth having. She let those words sit in the air between them. Then, slowly, deliberately, she leaned in just an inch closer. I don't scare easily, Judge Gates. A muscle in his jaw twitched. She turned on her heel and walked back to her table. But that moment, that split second, it told her everything she needed to know. Pam Bondi sat back down, her mind racing. That wasn't just a power move. That was a warning. A veiled threat. And now she was sure of it. He had something to hide. And she was going to find out exactly what it was.